There were actually several inspirations behind it. Initially, I'd come up with the title, and then while I was in the archives of Marquette University going through the papers of the National Black Sisters Conference, I'd actually come across a quote given by the leadership in which they said, quote, education and religion are the first two subversive forces that an oppressed people can use to free themselves. Religion is the guts of all human life. It can suppress a people or free a nation. And for me, it was very important for me to sort of include that. Now I was sort of sort of patting myself on the back, if you will, to say I had actually gotten it right. But I think I mean it in many ways. Subversive in the sense that these are women who were explicitly excluded from going into religious life for well into the 20th century, solely on the basis of race. And so the idea of them embodying and in daring to profess the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience was something that was profoundly radical for a Black woman to do in the United States and indeed in much of the Atlantic world at that moment. And so subversive simply means by daring. It is subversive. It would have been subversive for a Black person and a Black woman in particular to embrace the celibate religious state and dare to dedicate her services for the upliftment of her communities.
Sure. Dr. Williams, it's a topic, as you mentioned, it's radical, and in some cases might be considered a little taboo to discuss because people don't consider that there was a type of segregation among religious because, you know, they're all part of an order and all they want to do is worship God. But there was that line that was drawn. In your research, tell us about how deep that line ran.
Well, prior to Second Vatican Council, Black sisters were severely marginalized within the church because of these long-standing practices of racial exclusion and segregation. The global population of Black sisters was numerically low, and in certain areas of the world, statistically insignificant. In the United States, for example, it's not until well into the 20th century that most of the nation's historically white congregations actually dismantled their whites-only admissions policies. When we think about sort of why there aren't that many Black sisters, or why there weren't that many Black sisters prior to the outbreak of, or sort of the onset of the 21st century, it's not because there were not Black women who did not want to go into religious life or who were not called into religious life. It was because they were not allowed to go into religious life. And so we can think about the reality and the existence of the historically Black orders, which ensured the survival of Black female religious life and the development. But the reality is we don't know how many hearts were broken.
And Dr. Williams, here we are now, and we talked about the Pew Research and how we are going to start seeing the changing face of religion. And it's not so much that it's changed because they've been there, but it's going to become more apparent, and because of the uprising of this religious structure in Africa and on the continent. Talk to us a little bit about that and what we are going to be seeing.
Well, it's important, right? I oftentimes point people to a 2013 study by the Catholic World News Report that noted that within the past 50 years, there had been unprecedented growth in the global Black sister population, and it was spurred primarily by the growth of sisters in Africa. The reality is that the church is experiencing steep sister population losses in Europe and the Americas. And quite frankly, in the next few years, if the global trends continue, the future face and dominant face of the Catholic sister will soon be brown and most likely African. And so what we're beginning to see now is sisters coming into the Americas, into the United States, into Europe. They are they're pursuing their higher education, but they're staffing Catholic institutions, and they are very literally changing the face and practice of Catholicism. And that is something that is a monumental shift in the practice of the church. We are witnessing a changing of the guard, and I think the world should be paying attention.
Paying attention and be prepared. In the seconds we have left, Dr. Williams, I want you to tell us when you expect the book to be out and how much of this changing face of the religious is going to be part of that book.
Indeed. So I am currently revising the manuscript, so it is at least still 2 years away. Nonetheless, these sisters will play a major role, specifically at the end, specifically with the formation of the National Black Sisters Conference in the United States after Second Vatican Council. What African American sisters themselves recognize is that many of them were facing repercussions for their political activism, and they themselves turned their attention to Africa, and specifically leadership from the National Black Sisters Conference founded a religious order in Nigeria America in the early 70s. And so what we're beginning to see is to see many of these African sisters coming back and revitalizing Catholic institutions and schools founded by African American sisters. And so they are going to play a major part in the epilogue and conclusion of the study.
Okay, Dr. Williams, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but that was the perfect last word. Thank you so much. I so enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to having you back at least a couple more times ahead of the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
You're very welcome.